Welcome back to our last session of Household Mission Statements. I'm Pastor Mark, and I am excited not only for the work that you have been a part of over the last couple weeks, but for the culmination and a bit of reflections that happen here today. As we launch into this, let me walk you through a bit of reflection. Now, the household mission statements, and it's worth probably saying this, there are multiple different ways you could do this. And if what you end up at the end of this process is slightly different from the template that we're going to walk you through here, I say that is wonderful, great, you do that. It's like all of discipleship. The process is the product. So it's your and my chance of talking with one another, with opening God's word, with prayerfully considering what is God saying to me, what's he inviting me to do about it. All of that is the point. The process is the product. But here's the process we're going to walk through today. 2 weeks ago, on week 1, we first started walking through this household mission statement workbook and having little bits of reflection that were all put together. Last week, we did the very last part of the workbook, opening God's word and then saying, what are the values that we particularly embrace and desire to model in our lives? Today, the goal will be that you will have put those things in a clarification process and conversation and put them down on paper in such a way that you hand in to your leaders, and then we will take them and produce them into a nice statement piece that we will hand back to you and share together. Now, as we head into it, you might remember that we started walking through in the booklet, right? I have a blank one here. In the booklet, we walked through this home. Yours is probably all marked up and with ideas and thought starters written in there. These are what we called the big rocks. And if you recall from week 1, when we were talking through the big rocks, that was that video where you say, look, there's lots of good things that you and I could do. But if everything's going to fit, you remember the video? If the big things are going to put in there, if it's all going to fit, you got to put the big rocks in first. And so that's been a big part of our process walking through this. Now, you have your book in front of you. We're going to take a pause right here at the front side. Take a moment, look over on page 4 and 5 of your book. Look over what's written there in your home, and going around each household or individual around your huddle right now, take a minute and each one of you share 1 or 2 things that well represent you and your household. Things that you say, right, when we're at our best, this is what we do. Every person, 1 or 2 things, say, when I'm at my best, when we are at our best, these are things that we do. I'll meet back with you in just a few minutes. All right, welcome back. Now, before we dig into the next part, we're going to spend some time in God's Word. That's a core habit for what we do here. And so you probably all have, or you will be handed out pretty soon, Huddle leaders, this statement, this household mission statement handout for today. I would like you to take about 2 minutes, and about probably 3 of you, would you take turns and just read paragraph by paragraph, read out loud for your huddle, these verses from Joshua 23 and 24. And I'll talk again about it in just a couple of minutes. See you in a moment. So you just read paragraphs from the end of the book of Joshua, an Old Testament book. It's written by a guy named Joshua. It chronicles his time of leadership of the people of Israel. Now, as we walk into this, Joshua 23 and 24, these represent the end of Joshua's leadership in life. He has been a notable, a loved, a truly remarkable leader in the life. Everybody held him in high esteem. This was a very important figure, not only in their history then, but even now when we look back at it. And his ministry, well, his leadership, it began outside the promised land. It began in the wilderness, and he's the one who led them across the river into the promised land. Like when he took over leadership, the land that they're looking at is only promised. Now, this is at the end of his life, the end of his leadership, and now the promised land is what they occupy. They are living in the promise. It is that awesome. They now possess it. And it's as he is heading towards a man in old age, he has some important things to say. And you can imagine Israel almost like a family. The family leans in when he says, I have some things I want to share with you. And everybody says, shh, shh, shh. Joshua's speaking. And the primary question remains, now that they have the land, they occupy it, they have this inheritance, things are excellent, they've been looking forward to this for generations. Now the question comes, how will they live within that land? And Joshua is about to speak. Among the other things that he says is this important line, and it's worth lingering on this a little bit. He has said to them, in the midst of other things, throw away the gods your forefathers worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt. Now that's pretty extraordinary. Understand the reality of what he's saying this. Hey, all those gods that your forefathers worshipped right beyond the river, back when Abraham was called, hundreds of years earlier, those gods, back when Abram was a pagan star worshiper and he was with this idol worshiper Sarai, and God has gathered them, brought them to the land, said, you're going to have this land. And they're like, wow, it's unimaginable. But this is even before they were in Egypt, but they were slaves in Egypt. Here's what's happened. They're still carrying those gods. They still have them in their satchels. And Joshua is saying, folks, God has come through. It's time to let go of the other gods. I'm bringing that up and pausing on that here and now because as you're working on a family mission statement, it is very possible that one of the reflections you might have is what things have we been carrying with us that now is a time to pause and let go. It might be grandpa's temper was passed down. It was in dad, and you go, it's in me. It's so-and-so's perfectionistic or critical ways. It might be addictions, habits, compulsions, things that you might pause and say, it's time to let those things go. So on a brief pause point here and now, my question to you, again, each household around your huddle here and now, before we've put together our family mission statements, our household statements, think through this. I bet there are things that you go, I would like to leave this behind. And it's worth pausing and reflecting upon that here and now. Each person, I'm going to give you about 7 minutes. What do you desire, by God's grace, to leave behind and not carry forward any longer? I'll catch you again in a few minutes. Welcome back. Those are powerful and important conversations, whether you were able to fully share and articulate that here in your huddle now, or a little bit of a to be continued conversation that you might say, what really do I want to leave behind? What have I unknowingly been carrying with me? Now, while that conversation can keep going, here's where we go here and now. Joshua, you've just read it, has given this statement, right? It was, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Now, understand something about this guy who is speaking. This is Joshua. Joshua is a big deal. He has all the credentials to lead his people. He has been a wildly successful military commander. They've never known victory like this. You can imagine this. Even in our country, we military generals, Civil War leaders, World War II people, we tend to elect these people presidents. We say when they speak, we want to listen to them. It matters to us. Joshua is all that and then some. He's a very popular leader of the nation. And people might whisper, he knew Moses. He worked with Moses. The Moses? Yes, the Moses. And Moses handpicked him. That's a lot of credibility. And if that wasn't enough, he has been appointed by God himself. The striking thing, even with all those credentials, right? If anybody can speak on behalf of a nation and say, here's our charge, this is what we're going to do, it is Joshua. And yet Joshua himself doesn't speak for the whole nation. You might already know how to fill in these next blanks. Joshua, who is all those bullet points and then some, says, as for me and my house. That's the reality. Nobody else can say that for you. There's a lot of things going on in society that are beyond your ability to control, but you get to go, here's where you have extraordinary influence. As for me, as for my house, this is how I want things to be by God's grace, by God's blessing. As for me and my house, this is what we want. And God invites us to pay that kind of special attention to our homes. That's what we're landing on now with this mission statement. So you have in front of you this big piece of paper, and here's some instructions filled into it. Here's a template for you to follow. God has shaped the Dawn home to demonstrate, and then you can just write in the values. And you might have 4 values, you might have 5, you might have 3. Whatever you say, these are the values. And we're going to demonstrate these values by, and that's then when you write statements from your home. So all of these things, well, let me just kind of go back here. All of these things, the statements from your home, you've been walking and talking through these kind of things. God has given us these values. He's made us demonstrate these values by, and then you pick a statement. What have you reflected on by this kind of thing, which I wrote in my kitchen, something that keeps us healthy, relationally healthy, physically healthy? Boil these down into those statements, and that's what we're going to put. Let me do another bit of lingering ways to think about it. When you kind of go this, you could consider this list. Think about habits or activities that are consistent with your core values. What represents a solid front door? And the way that you state that might find its way there. What nurtures health from our kitchen? What activities look like our living room, ways that we are connected, play with one another, support one another? What practices foster peace in our bedrooms, right? We went through that. A faith statement, some of the things that enable you to rest or opposite, keep you awake. What are examples of those things? If it helps, you can think about them from the opposite side. What puts dents and chips in our front door? What injures the reputation we want to have? What gets in the way of health? What compromises our connectedness? What undermines peace, right? You can approach this either way, positive statements, negative statements, but ultimately we're coming back to filling in this template. God has shaped the Don family to demonstrate, and we'll list our values the way that God has shaped us, and then just by fill in the blank. And that's ultimately where we finish up here today. We're going to give you a bit of time to fill in the blanks on this, chew on it a little bit, prayerfully converse about it, and put it together. That little bit, the goal at the end of today is that you would mark up. Ultimately, the goal here is that you finish today with this all filled up. You can write on it, scratch it out, give it to your leader if you're done with it. If you've messed it up and you want another copy, I'll make sure your leader has enough for it. Now, that's where we finish up today. When you're done, give your handwritten copy to your leader. We will put it into a nice finished document and deliver that to you. Here's the goal, is that you would then hang it someplace in your house. Remember, these are your big rocks. This is who God has made you to be. Holding on to these things, saying yes to that, enables you to say no to the other things, anything that would get in the way of those things. And again, the way that you put it there, and you say it now, you might say it differently in 2 years. You might say it differently in 2 months. This is a living document. And ultimately, I pray God's blessings on this living document. And the goal is that you would start living it together. And then that shapes your life now. And it's part of your witness and influence in a way that reverberates even into eternity. God bless you on your work time now. And I will be praying for you that you get clarity of all of the yeses that God has put in your life. God be with you all.